Right now, you are probably sitting in a bright room. Your room is flooded with intense, artificial white light. If the power violently cuts out, your heart rate spikes. You immediately reach out for your glowing digital phone. You are desperate to push the heavy blackness away. You cannot stand being left alone in the dark. Your modern obsession with streetlights is incredibly unnatural. Your constant need for digital illumination is a modern disease. Your ancestors survived the terrifying, dangerous prehistoric night. They did not survive by turning on a simple switch. They survived by willingly walking into the absolute deepest places. They actively sought the blackest, terrifying places on Earth. Every single night, millions of modern humans banish the dark. You lock your heavy wooden doors tightly against the night. You demand total visibility just to feel entirely safe. We live in a world of massive artificial illumination, yet we are constantly plagued by a crushing biological fear. We are deeply terrified of the cold, unseen dark. For millions of years of history, there was no electricity. When the sun dipped below the horizon, the world changed. The ancient world fell into a terrifying, predator-filled blackness. As diurnal creatures, humans are naturally completely blind, and yet, our brave ancient ancestors did not simply hide. They did not cower under the thick covers in panics. They actively sought out the deep darkness of underground caves. How did they survive this terrifying, total sensory deprivation? How did they walk into the black without losing their minds? To successfully solve this incredible ancient human mystery, we must entirely dismantle the biggest atmospheric myth in history. We must destroy the myth of the terrified, hiding caveman. Welcome back to another deep dive into the ancient huddle. Today, we deconstruct exactly how ancient humans survived darkness. We will look at a revolutionary ancient lighting technology. This technology was discovered deep in the ancient caves of France. We will deeply explore the highly surprising acoustic science. We will reveal the deeply embedded acoustic secrets of art. And you absolutely must stay until the very end, because we will soon reveal a highly emotional, profound realization. We will show you a massive tribal huddle of warmth. It completely reframes our isolated modern relationship with the dark. For decades, popular culture painted a simplistic, wrong picture. We are constantly told that early humans were completely terrified. This cartoon image portrays our ancient ancestors cowering in fear. It shows them nervously hiding just inside the cave entrance. It imagines them shivering violently in fear of the blackness. It pictures them waiting desperately for the warm morning sun. The underlying premise of this story is simple and wrong. Since humans cannot physically see in the pitch-black night, we assume they absolutely must have avoided the dark. But modern archaeological science recently dealt a massive blow. The terrified, constantly hiding, absolutely fearful caveman is a myth. Ancient humans did not cower fearfully from the massive dark. They boldly and bravely stepped entirely into the freezing void. And this terrifying reality brings us to our second loop. We must examine the brilliant fat-burning lamps of the Ice Age. To truly understand how prehistoric humans faced the terrifying dark, we absolutely cannot just look at the shallow, sunlit entrances. We have to look incredibly deep underground into the earth. We must look far past the comforting reach of natural light. We must go where the blackness is absolute, thick, and terrifying. Archaeologists were carefully exploring the deep passages of ancient France. They were mapping the twisted mazes of Lascaux and Chauvet caves. And what they eventually discovered deep inside was completely breathtaking. Deep inside the twisting, terrifying, confusing underground limestone mazes, highly trained researchers eventually found beautifully carved pieces of rock. Our brave ancestors did not just stumble around completely blindly. When they confidently descended into the deep, terrifying ancient earth, they brought their own highly engineered, portable lighting technology. When researchers carefully analyzed these deeply carved ancient stones, they found the incredibly faint, microscopic chemical residue of fat. These were incredibly sophisticated, deeply advanced prehistoric burning lamps. Ancient humans would carefully carve a smooth bowl into limestone. Limestone beautifully prevents the burning heat from transferring to hands. They would carefully fill the bowl with incredibly thick fat. They used the rich, deeply valuable fat of a reindeer. Then they would tightly weave a highly specialized burning wick. This tiny wick was carefully made of moss or dried bark. When successfully lit, this tiny, deeply fragile moss wick transformed. It would slowly draw the deeply melted, hot fat upward. It successfully produced a steady, incredibly reliable, beautiful orange flame. 30,000 years ago, our ancestors were not hiding. They were actively, bravely invading the deepest caves. They walked for hours deep into the twisting labyrinths. They bravely carried absolutely nothing but a tiny, flickering flame. The handheld flashlight is absolutely not a modern invention. It is an incredibly ancient, highly advanced Paleolithic survival tool. But this incredible evolutionary leap leads to our third loop. We must now confront the terrifying acoustic resonance of the cave. If ancient humans had to burn highly valuable animal fat, why did they voluntarily go so dangerously deep underground? The deep cave was incredibly damp, absolutely freezing and dangerous. If their deeply fragile, tiny moss wick accidentally blew out entirely, they would be instantly trapped in absolute, totally crushing blackness. They would be completely unable to find their difficult way out. Why take such a massive, completely terrifying, potentially deadly risk? Why risk absolute death just to paint a horse on a wall? The highly shocking answer lies in their incredibly advanced sensory intelligence. When you boldly walk into a massive, deeply echoing cave, you do not just instantly lose your physical sense of sight. you completely change the way you hear the entire world. Brilliant acoustic researcher Iegor Reznikoff spent many long years studying this. He studied the deeply hidden, beautifully painted caves of France. He slowly walked completely alone through the pitch-black ancient passages. He made incredibly loud, highly sharp clicking noises with his mouth. He listened carefully to exactly how the ancient sound bounced back. What he eventually discovered completely shocked the modern scientific community. The brave ancient humans did not just paint completely randomly. They did not just choose any flat, accessible, smooth limestone wall. They specifically, carefully placed their most beautiful ancient paintings. They placed them exactly in the locations with highest acoustic resonance. Wherever a loud echo was the absolutely deepest and most powerful, wherever a human voice would intensely reverberate and massively multiply. They painted their brilliantly glowing, incredibly beautiful, ancient herds of bulls. This entirely means ancient humans were not just looking at walls. They were deeply, intensely, and entirely listening to the echoing stone. 30,000 years ago, in the absolute, deeply terrifying pitch black, they bravely used ancient sound as a deeply primitive sonar. They used it to safely navigate the completely pitch-black maze. They slowly followed the deep echoes deeper and deeper into Earth. They successfully marked the most incredibly powerful acoustic chambers with art. But our deeply ancient adaptation to the massive dark goes deeper. It goes completely down to the very deep social fabric of the mind. Ancient humans are absolutely not cold, totally solitary biological machines. We do not simply process boring visual data in total isolation. We are deeply spiritual, highly imaginative, incredibly emotional primates. Modern society aggressively teaches us to deeply fear the quiet dark. We try to stay constantly heavily stimulated by bright digital screens. But highly successful ancient tribes actively used the dark for connections. By willingly walking entirely into a massive sensory deprivation chamber, the ancient tribe completely stripped away the chaotic visual distractions. Our incredible survival is completely built on heavily sharing the darkness. We heavily share the incredibly overwhelming experience of the absolute unknown. We are highly cooperative dreamers, biologically built to protect our family. Now let us slowly, carefully bring these three deeply nested loops back together. Let us look deeply at the grand, sweeping realization of what this means. When you look deeply back at the terrifying, pitch-black Pleistocene cave, you absolutely do not see a brutal landscape of isolated panic. You completely see a highly cooperative, incredibly warm, deeply emotional tribal huddle. The incredibly brave act of willingly walking completely into the massive dark. It was absolutely not a highly private, isolated, thrill-seeking adventure. It was the absolute, undeniable, heavily beating heart of prehistoric trust. The deep, completely black cave was a high-risk, incredibly terrifying environment. but the incredibly tight physical gathering of highly warm human bodies provided safety. They huddled tightly around a tiny, incredibly fragile, beautifully flickering moss lamp. This deeply reliable, intensely emotional, incredibly powerful ancient safety net kept everyone sane. And this highly profound realization brings us directly to the ultimate contrast. We must look at the powerful contrast of the ancient huddle. In our highly advanced modern world, we sit totally alone in lit rooms. We are absolutely terrified of total silence and completely empty darkness. We constantly heavily distract ourselves with completely endless, incredibly loud digital media. Sensory deprivation has tragically become a highly terrifying, deeply isolating concept today. It has devolved into a totally solitary punishment and frustrating barrier to productivity. But over 30,000 long years ago, deep inside the echoing earth, the massive, crushing darkness was the ultimate, pure expression of intense communal love. Because surviving the terrifying deep cave absolutely required intense, massive mutual reliance. The deeply united members of the incredibly strong tribe constantly huddled tightly together. The brave artists, the talented singers, and the completely terrified children shared light. When a highly brave, incredibly young hunter felt the deep, bone-crushing weight, when he felt the highly terrifying absolute blackness aggressively pressing deeply in on him, he did not rapidly panic in total, completely lonely isolation. He did not helplessly stare entirely alone into the terrifying, massive, empty void. He simply carefully listened to the deeply echoing voices of his surrounding, warm tribe. He heard the highly rhythmic, beautifully powerful chanting bouncing perfectly off the walls. He saw the glowing, incredibly flickering painted image of a massive ancient bull. He entirely shared a deeply quiet, highly spiritual, emotional moment of intense awe. He shared it completely with his deeply trusted, highly protective ancient human family. He completely ensured that the totally terrifying power of the massive unknown was defeated. The highly terrifying dark was absolutely not a solitary metric of deep individual fear. It was a deeply shared, incredibly powerful biological anchor of absolutely unbreakable ancient trust. Today, we falsely believe our modern, deeply seated anxiety can be easily cured. We think we can completely fix it by installing much brighter artificial lights. We try endlessly to stare completely at much more incredibly loud digital screens. We constantly force our highly exhausted minds to entirely survive in a totally artificial world. But we were entirely never designed for this incredibly extreme, constantly illuminated modern isolation. We are totally missing the incredibly beautiful point of ancient prehistoric human resilience. Our highly successful ancient ancestors survived the massive dark not because they erased it. They totally survived because they possessed a highly fluid, deeply emotional courage. This invisible courage completely allowed them to walk into terrifying shadows together, And vastly more importantly, they successfully survived the terrifying darkness for one reason. They survived because they completely filled it with beautifully shared echoing voices. Your completely exhausted modern mind does not just deeply crave a brighter bulb. It does not desperately want a significantly bigger, entirely louder digital screen. It deeply, biologically, and fiercely completely craves the absolute warmth of the ancient huddle. It desperately craves the tightly shared, highly emotional acoustic resonance of the deep cave. It longs entirely for the deeply slow, highly rhythmic, beautifully patient chanting of the tribe. It completely desperately needs the deeply relaxing, totally comforting knowledge that you are never alone. So, the very next time the incredibly bright modern power completely cuts out, do not just rapidly panic and immediately grab your glowing digital phone. Feel a deeply profound, entirely quiet respect for millions of years of brave empathy. Feel the ancient communal love that literally beautifully built your complex conscious mind. Listen closely and highly adaptively to the deep quiet today. Dream incredibly beautifully and deeply communally with your close loved ones. And carefully remember the ultimate, incredibly powerful survival secret of our ancient ancestors. It wasn't just entirely how they bravely carried the tiny, deeply fragile flame. It was entirely how beautifully and tightly they constantly faced the deep darkness together. If this deeply researched video has completely changed how you deeply understand our ancient history, please entirely subscribe to Ancient Huddle today. We are deeply dedicated to widely sharing highly cinematic, deeply researched stories. We endlessly explore ancient survival and deep evolutionary secrets trapped in bones. Thank you so much for completely watching, and deeply remember to cherish the ancient huddle.